Good afternoon. We get the pleasure of the afternoon session after we've all eaten and are feeling that, but thank you for coming. So we're doing this pretty informally. We're going to talk for a little bit, and then if there's questions, definitely want to take questions. We're going to introduce ourselves first so folks know who we are, and then I'll kind of do a quick overview, and then folks will talk about specific items, and then we'll do question and answer. If we end before 3, great, people can go. If we're here till 4, why not? Isn't that what you all want to do? Talk about General Conference for multiple hours? We all could. Okay, I could. I'll speak for myself.
I can talk about it. What do we say?
All right, so we're just going to pass the mic. Introduce ourselves, clergy, lay, where we're at, delegate, reserve, the whole shebang.
Megan Berg, I'm clergy. I serve as the Congregational Resource Minister for Colorado Front Range and the pastor of Westminster UMC. I am first reserve for what was Legacy Rocky Mountain because, yes, we are still having to be in the 2 because we didn't ever have 2020. So we will actually be fully formed into Mountain Sky from the eyes of the General Conference after this General Conference.
Whew. Missing a General Conference. There's so many things. Jessica Rooks, District Superintendent, Colorado Front Range, and clergy delegate for Mountain Sky, or for Rocky Mountain, Legacy Rocky Mountain Conference.
My name is Jasper Peters. I am clergy serving the people of Denver with Belong Church, and I am your first elected clergy delegate out of Legacy Rocky Mountain, and I'm from Mountain Sky, and I'm just going to claim it now.
Jeff Rainwater, currently serving lead pastor of Hope United Methodist Church in Greenwood Village. I think I'm second reserve, jurisdictional delegate, Rocky Mountain Conference Legacy, and yes, Mountain Sky. Everyone else will figure that out after this year, so that's good.
Yeah, and just a reminder, the conference that we're going to in May of 2024 is actually the General Conference 2020 conference. It's just been delayed, just so you know. I'm Susan McIntosh. I'm the only lay representative up here. Oh my goodness. I'm a member of St. Luke's United Methodist Church. My official title, I think, is like jurisdictional reserve delegate. I'm like on the bottom of the list, but because it's been 4 years, there's not as many. So I'm here.
You're actually a General Conference reserve now because things have changed. Yes, so this is the 2020 General Conference happening in 2024. It cracks me up, but we always have to say this is still the 2020 General Conference. So all of the business that was before the 2020 General Conference, all of the legislation that had been written, that had been provided, all of that is still where we're at, along with additional legislation that was then presented in a timely manner by the deadline for 2024. But this is the 2020 General Conference happening in 2024. There have been a lot of shifts over the last 4 years. I like the laughter, yes. Lots of shifts over the last 4 years. Things that we thought were going to pass 4 years ago are kind of no longer on the table at all, and things that we weren't talking about a whole lot are definitely on the table. There are the 3 R's that folks, kind of centrist, progressives, folks who want to remain United Methodist have stated as 3 primary focuses for this General Conference. It's removal of the harmful language, regionalization, and the revised social principles. So a lot of the work that gets done is done around those 3. Removal of the harmful language, and that means removal of all of the exclusionary language around LGBTQ inclusion, ordination, removal of harmful language, regionalization, which would change somewhat our structure, and then the revised social principles. You can find all of this legislation on the General Conference website. The legislation is public. You can download it as a PDF. There's actually multiple parts to it. You can print out. I'm on the Financial Administration Committee, so I printed all of my legislation, which was about 400 pages. That's just one of the 14 committees. So we're going to take some time. Different folks have volunteered to talk about those 3 R's. So we're going to spend some time on the 3 R's, then a little bit of just anything else going on at General Conference, and then some questions. So did you want to say something first?
Could I? Yeah. Something in our delegation meetings that both Megan and Jessica have helped us with is asking the honest question, does this matter? Does this, do you remember in Lost, every like 2 hours they had to push numbers into a keyboard randomly, and they asked, does this really, am I doing anything with my time and my effort here? And a 4-year delay has the ability to introduce cynicism and make us question and maybe even be pessimistic. No, this doesn't matter. I will say it matters as much as we allow it to, and it matters as much as we allow it to be important to us. And I want you to know it is very important. We've been tired. Energy's coming back. It's very important to us. You can help it be more important by helping us know what's important to you. So in some ways, when we know that this matters to you or you're curious about it, whether it's the legislation or the relationships that we're fostering overall, I say that to say, we're welcoming your questions and absolutely solicit your prayers between now and General Conference, but you're helping us in ways that you might not understand by being in this room right now, by asking us questions, by encouraging us. And so I'm sure it matters to you enough to be in this room, but I hope that you know it matters, you matter to us, and you're helping us to represent Mountain Sky by the way that you're supporting us, being on reading teams, asking questions, and all of the above. So keep going, thank you, and encourage others to show up and continue to pray and be in conversation with the delegation as well. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, that was great. We're gonna start with removal of harmful language, which Megan, you're talking on, right?
I think so. So removal of the harmful language is a little bit complex in the way that all of these are a little bit complex because it's not all in one place in the Book of Discipline. So when we think of it most frequently, we think about the incompatibility language, which actually falls under the social principles. So I'm going to let Susan talk about that in the revised social principles and the ways that that language would change. So that portion falls under the Legislative Committee, Church and Society too. But actually, if we were to try to remove all of the harmful language and exclusionary language, we would also need to remove the funding ban, which is under financial administration. We would need to remove the blocking of gay and lesbian clergy, which is under faith and order. We would open the option of marriage for all, which falls under ordained ministry. We would remove specific chargeable offenses, which fall under judicial administration. And then we would need to delete a footnote that was added under ordained ministry as well for prohibitions on ordination. Higher education and superintendency would have 2 different deletions, especially from things that came out of 2019, in which we expanded the harmful language. Ordained ministry would also want to remove the just resolution process from 2019, and then judicial administration would have 5 additional petitions that they would need to change in order to see this removed. So if you want to spend some time in your Book of Discipline, because that is where you like, I have printed out a list from RMN of every single change and paragraph number that would need to change from the whole Book of Discipline if we were going to remove all of it. So one of the things that has a really high potential of happening is that we see some change, but not all the change that we would like to see happen. And there's a lot of different pieces and parts, right? The petitions that see these changes both have to come before the legislative committee, which is decided on by the chair that is elected by the legislative group when they meet. They get to decide what order petitions come. So if a petition never makes it before the legislative committee, that petition just disappears. It doesn't have any other way to make it before the body. Then if it passes, just like we've done previously in annual conference, if it passes by a certain amount, it will go to the plenary floor on consent calendar. If it doesn't pass by a certain amount, it comes up possibly with a, end of the day. How do we decide to do this after 2 o'clock? But if there's a variety of ways in which things could or could not make it. And what I will say is that I think if we're being honest, the potential that every single one of these changes is going to happen this April is pretty low. We're probably not going to see every single one of these changes happen this year. I do think it's coming. I think all of these changes are coming. I think the removal of the more harmful language that came in 2019 is most likely to occur this year, that those added stipulations that were added in 2019 will be removed. But I think the other pieces may be more complex, partially because of a push towards regionalization. And a lot of these are US-centric, related to US culture. And so if we're hoping for regionalization change, there's a chance that leaving some of these things alone until we can have a US regional conference may be a better move for our overall global denomination. And that makes me sad. So I think that's just a reality we need to be really honest about. And I think that's a really great place to move to regionalization.
Before Jasper starts, I wanted to say one thing we should have said at the beginning. For folks who don't know the structure of the 2-week general conference, the first week is spent in committees, 14 committees, and Megan listed about 6 of them that the removal of harmful language has to go in front of. So we spend a full week in committees doing pretty much all of the legislation. Some things can go to consent calendar, some things then don't get enough votes and they go to the full plenary. The second week, we are together as a whole body in plenary for a full week. If you want to go to general conference, we have lots of folks from the conference that go and watch and support. Sometimes folks go and get coffee for the delegates or go send messages or just sit and take it all in. If you go the first week, you spend the week watching committee work, which is actually really kind of fascinating. It's not usually when most people go. They go the second week when you watch the big plenary, and we spend the full second week really wrestling through all the hard stuff as a group. But when we talk about committees, there are 14 committees that all of the legislation gets divided between for the first week, and then we spend the second week hashing out things that happened in committee and voting on the things that need the full plenary. So everything that we're going to talk about tonight is in multiple committees. So sometimes something passes in one and doesn't pass in another, and it gets really interesting. And that's really going to be true for regionalization. Jasper.
Very much so. That's true for all the reasons Jessica mentioned. It's also true because there are 8 different, at least, pieces of legislation that are in different areas. There's a chance that some of them might be pulled out of one area and seen in another area, but when we talk about regionalization, we're actually talking about, if you're zooming in on a number of pieces of legislation that will make some minor, some major changes, I want to zoom out for a moment, and even before we talk much about what regionalization means, I'll say that selfishly, because it's the thing I'm focusing on largely, I think it's the most important thing before us at General Conference in a way. And I say that because if we aren't able to navigate it well, I think that our hopes of revitalizing our connection will be damaged. I think it's really important that we get behind regionalization, and I also think it's likely that we're going to kick the can down the road on removal of the harmful language so that we can do regionalization. And even if that's the best choice we can make in this moment, let's acknowledge for a moment that that stinks. It should not be the case. It's a failure of our system that we can't do the right thing for the right reason, right? And that is a bit of where we are. We are in a place where we are trying to deliberate and be in thoughtful relationship with our siblings in Christ who might agree with us on very little. And sometimes that process of trying to come together and trying to come to consensus and trying to move the really important thing forward means that we leave people hanging and leave important issues undone, and that I don't feel good about that, and I don't think any of us should, but maybe we can hold that together and continue to hold each other. Specifically about regionalization, our church does not operate currently in a consistent way. There are also 26 letters in our alphabet. I'm going to drop all the truth bombs, the big revolutionary stuff right now. Our church does not function currently in a consistent way. Specifically, the way that that Methodists are able to organize, the way that they are able to create legislation that applies to them is greatly limited outside the United States. This is largely due to decisions we made because we wanted to merge, but we didn't know how to get along. We wanted to merge back together 95 years after the Civil War, but we didn't know how to do it without segregation. We wanted to come together to be a big denomination in 1968, but we didn't know how to do it and also listen and speak with compassion for everyone involved. So right now, the U.S. operates in a way that allows us to be a particular kind of dysfunctional, and we exist in our jurisdictions. Here in the West, we have certain ways of doing things. Other jurisdictions operate separately. In the U.S., we're kind of special because most of General Conference, a lot of it ends up being about U.S. stuff only. The Book of Discipline, as it applies to people outside of the U.S., certain pieces of it apply, certain ones don't. Certain standards are upheld outside the U.S. and other ones are not. Regionalization changes that in the sense that we write the same kind of rules for everyone in the church. And the way that we get to gather, have self-determination while also being connectional on that tricky level, like bigger than this, smaller than maybe the whole country, right? But like that level where you don't necessarily know the people that you're working with and speaking with, and yet you can have functional relationships. Now, I want to say, I think that changing to a regionalized model will give us a lot of things. It will give us the opportunity to have a global church without worrying that we're theologically offending each other all the time, right? We have safe spaces to interact and grow. It also lets the U.S. figure out who it is and not need this vestige of segregation, right? We don't need to be apart from our siblings necessarily in other jurisdictions. But like, coming up all the way out of the weeds and the specifics, I think that a regionalized church is simply a better expression of Methodism. It's a better way for us to actually be together and work together and figure out what we agree on and figure out what is most motivating for us. That said, I'm speaking maybe obviously from a pretty U.S.-centric standpoint. In case that's not obvious, let me name it for you. We have partners and siblings around the church who don't necessarily agree. I haven't heard a lot of substantive objections to regionalization, but what I have heard is that there are people who would not support removing the language, who recognize that if we regionalize, maybe one of the first or second things that the U.S. does, if we have the opportunity, would be to remove that language. And because of that, some people either think or are being led to believe that a yes on regionalization is actually a yes to LGBTQ inclusion. I wish that was true, but it's not. Like, I wish that we could say yes to both of them together if I'm talking about my personal values, but in reality, that's not what the legislation does, but it is giving pause to some folks in our church because they're worried about what might come later. They're worried about making this step into a different kind of relationship where the General Conference no longer directly is the most direct voice for each part of the church. Instead, a regional conference, a regional U.S. conference would be the group that primarily helps U.S. folks talk about U.S. issues. And I think that model is a step closer to perfection. I think it is us growing in important ways, and it's going to take some significant work to get there. I have other thoughts, but I want to maybe pause while I can pretend to have been brief, I think, still. So.
Okay, I get to try to combine both of what Megan and Jasper just said, because as Megan noted, the revised social principles will have a big impact. And the way that the General Board of Church and Society, which was the group that was mandated to revise the social principles, I think touches on the regionalization and the way we want the church to work. So I think the process and the outcome have some impact on both of those pieces. Let me talk about the process first, because like Jessica, I'm a bit of a process geek. I like knowing when things are done well. And I think the General Board of Church and Society did a really good job in figuring out how to find a way to revise the social principles across the globe. So they were asked to do this, I guess twice, because in the documentation it talks about how they did it in 2012 and 2016. So this has been a long process. They were supposed to have it ready for the 2020 conference in 2020, but as we know, it's now 2024, so that's when the conference is going to be done. They had 52 different people who were responsible for writing the revised social principles, and over 400 people across the globe who read and commented and revised. So it included people from every different central conference and all of the 5 jurisdictional conferences in the US. So very comprehensive global response, which means that in one presentation they talked about how it may not be perfect, but that's okay because we can make it better when we start living it and start living into the values that are identified in those social principles. I'm realizing I might need to back up. The social principles are essentially a piece of documentation that the church has adopted. This version of it started in 1972. The Methodist Church or its predecessor, or the United Methodist predecessors, have had a social creed or social principles basically since forever. John Wesley wanted to do prison reform and feed the hungry and house the homeless and ban child labor, right? So he was part of the reason why we talk about these social principles, because we live and breathe in a world that is not just our church. And people are messy. So, that's what all of this is about. The pieces, Megan, that you alluded to, they do, in the revised social principles, they do talk about valuing everybody, no matter what they're worth, or no matter what they're worth, no matter what their perspective, what their gender identity, what their sexuality, all of that means that we are all valued people of God. There are obviously differences from one region to another, so how that is played out is going to be interesting. Another thing that's intriguing to me about this is that the revised social principles are actually 5 different pieces of legislation that go into 3 different committees. There's 3 church and society committees, because there's that much legislation for church and society. So it'll be interesting to see if, 2 of the pieces of legislation get approved and the other don't. So that'll be, yeah. I think, let me double check. I took all sorts of notes and then I wasn't reading them. Yeah, I think that's enough at this point.
So along with the 3 R's, things we will also obviously vote on is a church budget. The budget for the next quadrennium is greatly reduced from previous quadrenniums, partly because of disaffiliation, also because of decline. So that'll be a big thing. The Episcopal Fund is a hot topic right now. How many bishops we can financially support in the US and the central conferences. So that'll be a big part of the conversation and what we vote on, and deciding whether or not we're going to elect new bishops this year, or if we have natural attrition and just kind of let bishops was about to say die out. That's not what I mean. Retire out. Let bishops retire out. And there's a number of bishops retiring in 2024 and then even more in 2028. And if we don't elect, we just kind of let the number of bishops decrease and jurisdictions and central conferences reorganize if they need to. That'll be another big part of conversation.
Can I ask
Yeah.
about that scenario that you're naming? In the West, we have 5 bishops. 2 of them are facing mandatory retirement. So theoretically, if they were to retire and we weren't to re-elect, there would now be 3 bishops overseeing the entirety of the Western jurisdiction, right?
So we don't know what's going to happen at Western jurisdiction. There are 3 scenarios that we in the West are talking about. There could be more scenarios that actually we're not even sure about yet. Right now, the budget as being presented and the conversations about the Episcopal Fund assumes no election of bishops anywhere this year. So we would have 2 retire and not elect in the West. The Book of Discipline requires a minimum of 5 bishops per jurisdiction. It is a shall, and if you spend time in the discipline and know some of the nuances of language, there's shoulds, there's shalls, there's may. If it's a shall, you shall. So each jurisdiction has a minimum number of 5 bishops. If that's not changed, the jurisdiction can choose to elect even if folks don't want us to. So we could elect if nothing changes in legislation at General Conference. Or we could not elect and have 2 bishops serve over multiple conferences. 2 additional bishops. Bishop Cedric already serves 3 conferences right now in the greater Northwest. That would mean Bishop Dottie and Bishop Carlo also taking on multiple conferences and having Episcopal areas, kind of like when we were Yellowstone and Rocky Mountain. Now we might be Mountain Sky and Desert Southwest sharing a bishop. There would be a possibility that we would have 3 bishops serving all 5 conferences beginning in September. Or if there is a jurisdiction who has an abundance of bishops, we might get 2 bishops from outside of the jurisdiction. That's an if. We haven't necessarily heard those numbers kind of coming down yet, but we have an interjurisdictional episcopacy committee for this very reason. It's long established. So right now we're really talking about 3 possibilities. Electing 2 bishops in the West, not electing and keeping our 3 to serve 5 conferences, not electing, keeping our 3 and getting 2 from another jurisdiction. We won't know that until minimum annual or general conference, and then maybe even after, depending on Council of Bishops, GCFA, legislation. So we don't know. We in the West are actually functioning as if we're going to elect 2 because there are processes that have to begin now in order to get ready for elections. So we're moving forward with an assumption that we're electing 2. We don't know if we will. We'll know a major part of that after General Conference.
But we may not know that until jurisdictional conference, because it may be the jurisdictional body that chooses that, which means there's a chance that we will come to annual conference and decide if there are people who we want to lift up for potential episcopacy, but not knowing whether we will actually elect, but jurisdictional doesn't happen till July. So just know that at annual conference, you may see us bring forward names, even if we go to jurisdictional and decide not to elect. So.
I don't enjoy other people's suffering, but the looks on your faces, I feel better about the look that's been on my face in recent months. Right? It's a lot, right? And it's nuanced and it feels a little confusing. But thank you for working to understand this part of a really complex issue.
Before I went to question and answers.
I'm the coffee bringer, right? So I will be the coffee bringer that you heard about earlier. Just so you know why I'm up here. That's my reason. Yeah.
He's doing more than that. Are there questions? Okay. Now I'm getting my steps in.
What provisions, and I apologize because I haven't read it, what provisions does the regionalization plan make around the interjurisdictional episcopacy committee or the jurisdiction episcopacy committee? Do we know yet?
So regionalization does not currently change our jurisdictional structure. For some reason, I'm going to be bold. It should, right? It ought to. I don't know specific. I need to go look at the legislation to see. There could be something in there about some of the specifics that you're saying, but the broad picture, it doesn't force us to change. For instance, how we're organized jurisdictionally right now. We may want to, or we may find it wise or helpful to later on a U.S. regional level, but currently it doesn't reach down that directly into it, unless you.
What it does do is allow other regions to also do jurisdictions. So it doesn't take away the jurisdictions of the U.S., but it has language in there right now that if other regions that are now central conferences that would become regional conferences, they could implement jurisdictions if they wanted.
Have there been any efforts to coordinate with the Western jurisdiction with central conferences that are supportive of regionalization, just from a standpoint of making sure that there's a broader unified voice than the United States one is for regionalization?
Yes, and I'd give us a B thus far. In part because we recognize that it can't be mountain sky to some other conference. That's not really a functional relationship. So we build relationships person to person, group to group. That's where you're more likely to find agreement. I think we've made progress. I think that the folks who I know are supportive of regionalization, it isn't just a U.S. group. It's not just a U.S. movement. We're working hard with the folks who are responsible for the Christmas covenant and things like that, right? To have this be a continuity of that. I wish we thought about being in relationship, not just in the context of being in general conference. So sometimes that's we get to the conversation way too late, or we think about, oh, I wish we had other people here later. That's the B, right? Yeah.
I would encourage us to introduce ourselves before we ask our questions, just because not everybody knows everybody, knows everybody, knows everybody. And I will start with that since my name is Maggie Rowe and I'm a retired hospice chaplain. And I have several questions, but I'll start with probably the most basic one. I have concern in terms of people who are delegates to General Conference who are no longer United Methodists. And, I'll just stop at that.
So I think there's two issues there that we're trying to relate. One is petition authors that are no longer members of the United Methodist Church. And what we heard in orientation is there is no legal way for us to remove those petitions from consideration pro forma in advance. However, there is work being done to identify the petitions that have been authored by persons who have disaffiliated or left the denomination. And then that information will be presented to the legislative committees and to the delegates so that then they can do their due diligence and discernment around how to consider those petitions. There still are going to be delegates that are still United Methodists but sticking around even though we expect them to leave in the future. I think that speaks to Ben's question and concern in that we then have our work to do to build coalitions, build relationships so that those persons who may not be acting in the best interest of the denomination will not interfere with the good work that needs to be done. So that's what we know about how to address those that are still in the work right now, and I think that will be ongoing and developing as we get closer to General Conference and when we get there to sort of determine those sort of things.
I appreciate the politeness and the language with which you responded. Just saying. Just saying.
I was a DS for 5 years.
You learned your lesson well, Jeff. And I'll let somebody else go.
I will say, if somebody has disaffiliated, they cannot be a delegate. So if somebody was a delegate, but their church disaffiliated, they moved their membership, they are no longer a delegate. So only United Methodists. Now, we know a number of people are sticking around. But if somebody already left the denomination, they cannot be a delegate.
Hopefully I'm not getting too caught in the weeds on this, but it's something that's been kind of gnawing my brain since I first heard.
Name?
Oh, Matthew from FUMC Loveland. But this is something that's been gnawing on my brain since I first heard of this lack of bishops in the West. Is this one of three scenarios where we get bishops from another jurisdiction? Since Bishop Alavito's retiring, yes. Yes. Well, since she became bishop, actually, the West has been kind of hailed as a safe haven for queer people looking for ordination. And since she is one of the ones to retire, and we might get bishops from other jurisdictions, is there something in place, or will there be strategies so that the bishops we get might uphold those protections that are there?
I'll take a swing at answering. I serve on the Jurisdictional Committee on Episcopacy, and after the next election or not of bishops in July, I'm one of the folks who will get to discern and decide who is going where. So there's a couple different answers to your question. One thing I'll say is Bishop Karen and her election have added to the legacy of the West, absolutely. But our legacy for inclusion, thankfully, existed before that. Functionally, it does depend on all of our bishops, every one of our bishops in the West being committed to it. And so it's not so much that this one person might depart and that might change it, but because we're in good company, but it is a concern to say, well, what happens if somehow, I've never been a DS. What if they send us the worst bishops? What if, right, theoretically, tongue in cheek, but there's a worry, a reasonable worry, that we might receive bishops who don't represent our values and don't operate in a way that honors our history and our legacy. We're very aware of that. That's why who serves on that Jurisdictional Committee on Episcopacy, what kinds of decisions get made, what we're communicating to them now. We're communicating to them now. We've been for months saying, here's what we see down the road, here's what we're wanting, here's what's most important for us. We floated the idea of this is very theoretical. This is mostly to maybe make you laugh at the absurdity of it, so don't worry about the scenario necessarily. We flirted with the idea of combining conferences and realizing, well, if Colorado were to be combined with New Mexico, then that bishop would serve from Mexico to Canada. And that's wild. If we were in a scenario where episcopal areas were increased, our ability to be deeply effective and impact local church, the folks on the ground, it will lessen. I think it simply will. We don't want that. But even more so, we don't want bishops who don't represent us and don't represent our interests also coming alongside. And so I think those are I think you're identifying the two biggest negative outcomes that we might encounter. We can't control them, can't totally avoid them at this point, but we're thoughtful about them and trying to navigate far away from I think what you're maybe worrying about.
Matt, one thing I'd offer is that's partly the interjurisdictional committee on episcopacy. So all of the folks who are members of the jurisdictional committee on episcopacy make up the interjurisdictional. So the fact that our folks are already having that conversation means if it were to go to that, there would be lots of strategy and conversation. And I'm naive sometimes to think that a bishop who doesn't share our values, would they really want to come here? Some would, sure. But it's kind of like when the cabinet does work with appointing clergy, you try to make the best fit. Otherwise, you damage everybody. And I do believe that our interjurisdictional committee on episcopacy wants what's best for the church as a whole, and matching up a bishop to a conference that is just going to be in conflict doesn't serve anybody, and it doesn't serve the church. So yes, there will be lots of strategic conversations if we get to that. And there are bishops from other jurisdictions who would love to come here. I actually think, from what I've heard, there are already bishops that if that's the scenario, they will be the first in line because their values match up with ours better. I haven't heard that in any official way, but I've heard that kind of in some unofficial conversation. So hopefully, flirting
Except
with the
for
idea.
appointment making. I mean, as a DS for 5 years, there's a part that we don't often think about, which is a good portion of the Episcopal work is around other things in our values about inclusiveness and just the operational. I mean, a few of us have crossed jurisdictional and conference boundaries. I, for one, served in a conference where, the bishop's word was law, to coming to a conference where, good ideas die simply because the bishop said them. So, I mean, that is another part of that is another part of this conversation that I think we just have to keep in mind as well about appointment making. We do appointment making very differently here than other conferences, and that's going to be a learning curve for any Episcopal leader that comes our way. Geography. I mean, Mexico to to Canada, that is a whole other one that, I think if what I would be looking for is, are they willing to learn and be, missionally engaged in a culture that's not their own to a degree that they don't even do where they've been. I mean, every bishop has to do that. Every bishop that's elected goes somewhere where they were not from, and has to engage in that culture in a constructive way that recognizes the dignity of that culture. That's what I think what we're going to be looking for in scenario 3, even more than just theological values, because there's a whole lot more that's different than us, different about us than just our theological values.
We are a unique culture.
I want to add one thing. My church is going through a change in pastors this season, and I am constantly reminded that yes, the fit is good, it needs to be good, but the congregation, the church, and in this situation, the conference, stays the conference. We have the history, we have the body, we have the community to continue to be the personality that we've developed. And hopefully we can influence any bishop that comes in just as much as they can influence us.
Hi, I'm Amy Stapleton, one of the pastors at St. Andrew United Methodist Church. I was wondering, in just a logistical sort of way, can we receive who will be assigned to which committees, and how best to communicate with you while you're at General Conference, if there's a preferred way of doing that?
Yes.
Yes, you absolutely can. We are looking at Evelyn Warren, our communications director, is putting out all kinds of information about the delegates. We could ask her to include that and add committees even on the website. But you can always reach out to any one of us. We have it in a spreadsheet. So Jasper is on conferences. I'm on financial administration. Don Scarrett on Faith and Order. Gayla Joe Slauson, who's Legacy Rocky Mountain first layperson, is on ordained ministry and superintendency. Eileen Delgado is on judicial administration. Sorry, general administration. McCammon. So there's one that we're missing, but in the jurisdiction. So Legacy Rocky has 4 and Legacy Yellowstone has 2. So we have 6 delegates in our conference, which means we're only in 6 committees. But we're working with the delegates across the Western jurisdiction. We actually, tomorrow night, have a full meeting of the Western jurisdiction delegation. And we'll be breaking up into committee work and all kinds of stuff. So we only have 6 of them. If you want to read legislation and be in conversation with us, that's fantastic. We're putting groups together from different committees, especially those of us who are the delegates, to get some support. So if you're interested in that, email any one of us, and if you email me, I can connect you to who's kind of taken point for the different committees.
And some of the reserve delegates are also sitting in on those committees the first week. At least I know that's what I'm doing that first week, and frantically taking notes to update our delegates so that they know what's important, what's coming up, who said what, right? Who we can collaborate with.
What amendments happened, because once it hits committee and amendments start taking place, the original legislation that was written can vastly change. So we need listeners and observers in every committee meeting, listening, taking those notes, talking to the delegation so that we know if a piece of legislation is coming to the floor that we had previously supported, but oh my gosh, now with all the amendments, we don't like it. It's quick, and so as many folks who are good at that and have fun with that and enjoy that, or other people who just want to bring us coffee, we need all different kinds of support.
I wanted to add, the reason I was looking at Susan when you were talking about communications, Amy, is we realized a few months ago that even internally there were some communications that were missing. We were missing the mark on some things, and Susan has been one of the folks who's been instrumental in helping us to communicate well, receiving, sharing. I think what I was imagining when you were asking is like someone texting me, oh, I think you should vote this way on this legislation, and me seeing it 3 hours later, way too late for it to impact anything. I know that we have had conference-wide watch party groups on like WhatsApp, for example, that sometimes that is hey, that's everyone talking to everyone. But there are also, I'm imagining either there or sending a message to Susan or some of the other folks in the delegation, if there is something you need to get to us, that might be the better mechanism than like hoping that we see it when we're in the fray to a certain degree.
We're also talking about communication strategies while we're there so that every day we're reporting back and people are kind of hearing on a regular basis. All that's in the works.
And Don McCammon is on local church.
So hello, it's me again, and I didn't introduce myself. Ben David Hensley, I'm at Lakewood UMC. Going back to the jurisdictional bishop count, was there budget math that has led us to the point where we believe we can only handle 3 in the jurisdiction since 2020? Because there's significant legislation in the ACDA that speaks directly to this about everyone having a minimum of 5. And I'm just wondering how that's factoring into the discussion that it seems the Western jurisdiction is, being told to only elect 3. I was just curious about what's behind some of that.
It's not budget per jurisdiction, it's the budget overall. So there's the Episcopal Fund. There's GCFA has put out, everybody's looking backwards, sorry. GCFA has actually put out some really good reports on what it costs at the different level, different number of bishops. So they haven't broken it down by jurisdiction. They've looked at it as a total U.S. bishops. Total U.S. bishops, total Central Conference bishops. What can we afford? In 2016, we approved increasing the number in Africa, I think an additional 5. They're actually cutting that back now to 3 because of budget cuts. So when they talk about the Episcopal Fund and number of bishops, it's an overall number. So at this number, at this number, at this number, and then they look at the active bishops. They don't look at active bishops based on jurisdiction, they just look at the total number of active bishops. So right now the recommendation is no new election. So Southeast jurisdiction has already released that they've rearranged a couple Episcopal areas. They have 1 retirement. They're not going to try to re-elect. They're going to go, I think, from 11 to 10, and now they'll have 10 Episcopal areas, and they're good to go. Other jurisdictions are kind of looking at similar things, and so that as bishops retire, you just don't elect in. Well, when you're going from 10 to 11, that's a little different than going 5 to 3. So that conversation, I don't think, that conversation has happened in the West all over the place. We're talking about what it means to go from 5 to 3. As a global church, even kind of at the US level, we're talking about 36 to 28, not jurisdiction to jurisdiction. But if the legislation remains that each jurisdiction shall have 5, well, then the West can do what the West does. You know, we elect LGBTQ bishops when we're told not to. Maybe we'll elect bishops when we're told not to.
My name is Belinda Alcala. I belong to the St. Paul's United Methodist Church in Boulder. And I cannot even fathom how much money it costs to put on a general conference. It's just, So what I heard was, okay, correct me, I saw the skit, it helped me a lot. So the 2020 General Conference happens this year in 24. The discipline requires it be every 4 years. We know 28 will be 28, but I heard that we need one in 24. So the question was, were we going to have one in 26? And so my reaction when I saw that was, oh my gosh, how much money are we going to expend if we have a general conference in 24, 26, and 28? That extra one in 26 is sort of, it broke my brain. So I'm just concerned about that.
I like the "it broke my brain" comments. General conferences do that.
I agree with you. So the Council of Bishops has named the plan for this 26 meeting. Only a few different parties have the ability to call for a 26 meeting. If I'm being perfectly honest, it irked me a little bit that they called for it when they did. If they allowed general conference when we meet to decide and discern that's what we need, that would have made more sense to me. However, they didn't ask me. There is some legislation coming that I think lets us be more flexible, that lets us, in an emergency, meet digitally. So if there is another global pandemic, is there an option for us? For instance, that is the only little bit, that tangent that I just offered there about that piece of legislation is the only hopeful piece that I currently have that we aren't going to just spend a whole lot more money. It may be the right thing to do, but I notice it also. It gives me pause. I'm hoping that we can figure out regionalization, therefore our global gatherings will be less time, they'll take less money to accomplish, and possibly be more effective. But yeah, it stinks. I don't have a better.
I will say this, Judicial Council ruled that we don't have to have a 2026. So a year ago when the skit was performed, we thought we had to have a 2024 General Conference at some point, because Judicial Council at first kind of said yes, but then they came back and said, no, we don't have to. So we can have General Conference 2020 in 2024 and then have 2028. But then the Council of Bishops have called for a special General Conference in 2026. So it won't be 2 weeks. It won't be the first week of committee and the second week of plenary. It's kind of like in 2019 when we did that shorter one. And they called for it with the assumption that there will need to be follow-up for regionalization. The idea was if we pass regionalization in 2024 and can't implement it until things pass in 2028, it's going to really slow us down. if there's a special in 2026 that can move us along quicker, then we could actually really implement regionalization sooner. They can cancel the special call that they called for if need be, if there's not a real reason to have it. But it's not going to be the full-fledged 2-week general conference.
And like if you had a called charge conference in your local church, it would have a very specific agenda. A special called session of general conference has the same thing. So one of the things that I think is hard is that if we were to pass removal of the harmful language, it would not come up at 26. It would be only on the topic that they had named as the subject for that called session, which would be regionalization.
Any other comments?
Just a quick follow-up. If indeed there's a special called General Conference in 2026, would the delegates again be your lifetime appointment?
Are you not entertained?
So my one caveat with that for us is if we would elect, we would still have to do legacy conferences. Because the special called 2026 is a continuation of 2020 happening in 2024. So we would still be seated in our legacy conferences. So if we somehow decided to re-elect, we would have to elect in legacy conferences. Well, we have clergy who have only been Mountain Sky, who would then have to claim a legacy conference to put their name in. I mean, we have folks who would be legacy Rocky Mountain who now serve in Montana. My concern if we re-elected was that a lot of the work we've done to become Mountain Sky could actually get really messy. And so we would remain because of that. Because it'll be a continuation of the 2020 General Conference happening in 2024, special called in 2026. So.
Laura Rainwater, clergy, serving in Parker, Colorado. Different topic. Yay. Revised social principles. What are some of the highlights? Since I'm not going to read 400 pages. I was an observer in 2012, and everybody should look at the what ACDA or whatever it's called. You should really look at it. Anybody can submit legislation, but just a summary of revised social principles.
Just a summary of the revised social principles. So they're moving from, I think, 6 sections to 5 sections. They're taking out, I can't even remember now which one it is that they're combining with the social group, the social section. Social, my brain is not working. Making everything work better. You know, the social principles they were passed in 1972 after the merger, and they have been revised every quadrennium since. So they are social principles written by committee, which can get messy and can feel kind of clunky. The General Board on Church and Society has adjusted that, and also, like I said, they've really tried to focus on the global community, so trying to recognize that what was originally written in 72 was very US-centric. So let's pay attention to how this language sounds to somebody in the Philippines or to somebody in Europe. Right? Let's make sure that it is appropriate for everybody. And paying attention to the changes that have happened in the last 30 years, right? With technology and with other pieces and parts, and the growing concern of how we take care of the ecology, how we take care of our planet. There's been an emphasis on that as well. So.
So does the legislation take out the old and put in the new?
It's basically a rewrite, a massive rewriting. So, and there's some really good documentation that does not mean that you have to read all of it. Thank goodness. If you go to umjustice.org/resources and find the article that talks about the revised social principles, there's a handful of really good 1 or 2 pagers that talk about FAQs, the background of it, kind of the process, and you can go and look at the full document. And I think the whole social principles is maybe 30-something
20.
pages.
It's 20 pages,
20.
so don't be totally overwhelmed. If you want to go to the Advanced Daily Christian Advocate and you want to pull the social principles just so you can see them, it's only 20 pages of legislation.
Yeah.
And it's not actually legislative writing, right? It's the same way that we would encounter our social principles now.
Right.
So it is the passionate part and
Yes.
fun part of our book of discipline. It's the part that has all of our heart in it. So it is 20 pages that are worth all 1,000 pages of
Right.
our book of discipline.
It's the Micah 6:8 part of our church. Yes. So
Really briefly, I wanted to say that your question caught me off guard. Thank you. I was like, oh my gosh, I don't know which piece of it is my favorite. But in refreshing myself, what I appreciate is, this is the first time we've rewritten it in 5 decades, and a 5-decade-old document couldn't articulate our current cares in the world as effectively as one that's been updated. There are times where the book of discipline has felt more like a liability than a gift in the way that our church is right now. This is a gift, right? This is our ability to speak in positive terms about what United Methodists do, what we believe, and how we function in the world. And that piece is exciting for me generally because it means that we get to speak like that, right? Like we get to move through the world, less hopefully apologizing for a broken book that we have, and more living into the best part of our aspiration.
One tangible place I'll say, in the social principles, it changes the definition of marriage from 1 man and 1 woman to 2 individuals. So that would be part of removing the harmful language, a major part of the social principles.
yeah, and again, I'll reiterate the process that was taken to do this was amazing, and it's a fully Methodist process, which means a lot of committee work and a lot of praying, but it came out beautifully, right?
Ben Rowe, laity, Arvada UMC. The current social principles has a setting of it that's suitable for worship. I wonder if the new one will also do that.
There is a call and respond piece. If I had had the forethought and time, I would have figured this out, how to present it. It's actually a very nice call and respond within. I saw it back in 2019 and thought it was beautiful. And I think did we even try using it at St. Luke's back then, way back then? So yeah, it's really nice.
Other questions? We are also trying to set up opportunities for folks to pray for the delegation. We're talking about even kind of doing a prayer vigil where we have somebody signed up from the conference during the entire time so that different people are praying for us for the entire 2 weeks. We're working on some of that stuff. It should be coming out soon. If you have quilting or knitting groups, we've had folks do like prayer squares for delegates. Any of that kind of stuff is fantastic for us to feel the presence of the Mountain Sky Conference with us. So if you are someone who knows you want to pray for us or is hopefully already in prayer for us, we're trying to set up some more formalized conference support, so keep a lookout for that. What am I missing? Oh, Amy?
Related to that, we're interested in doing kind of a pre-post general conference session at the church, and I wondered if any of those had been planned with the delegation so that other churches could be involved, or if that's something we could do conference-wide.
I don't know if we have any planned, but that would be a great idea.
What we've told churches is that the delegation is always willing to come and be a part of stuff if churches want to set it up. So we hadn't necessarily planned ourselves doing something, but that's a good question. Or if we could, in partnership with a couple churches from across the conference who could host us, that'd be great.
Or do district-wide discussions?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, so I'm going to be super honest. Right now, we are spending all of our hours in committee work, reading legislation. So us organizing some of those things, whew. If a church and others want to organize it and we get to show up and talk and be a part of it, but not have to do all the prep work, that would be amazing. We want to be in relationship and communication with the conference. Right now, all of our focus is Charlotte. But that doesn't mean we don't want to be doing stuff within the conference.
And there are some opportunities coming up, but of course I have a meeting and I can't even remember when it is, so I'm trying to find it. On Thursday this week, Mark Calhoun and I are going to meet with Responsible Stewardship, and we'll be speaking about a variety of legislation, but it's Tuesday? It's not on my calendar on Tuesday. Cool. I can't be at that other meeting, Jessica. So it's on Tuesday at 11, but it's a responsible stewardship meeting, and we'll be talking about general conference stuff specifically that relates to stewardship. So one of the things is that with the reduction of the budget, there is a reduction possibly in apportionments, so that may be affecting your local church. There is also a major plan change for clergy pension. So if you would like more details about the clergy pension change, you could come to that because it will be very big and different than what it currently is.
Tuesday at 11. If you've done any of the responsible stewardship webinars, they're always Tuesday at 11. Oh, you have to register to get the link. So if you're interested, register.
I'm going to try. Amy, and for anybody else, if your church comes up with something that you would like to invite the delegation to, please let me know and I will include it in our district newsletters that go out to laity and to clergy so that we can try to make as big of a bang for their buck as we can and get people as informed as we can.
Now you've heard from our district administrator. Kind of, you've heard her voice. Other questions? Susan, Jeff, Jasper, Megan, anything else you want to say? No. So really pray for us, not just us, but everybody. It is an amazing experience. If you have any chance of even going for a few days during those 2 weeks, first week, second week, just to kind of go experience it is an experience. However you want to interpret that, it is an experience. But if you really want to see how we function as a global denomination, man, that's the time to go. We do have a block of rooms. The conference has a block of rooms, a limited number. There's a couple left, so you get a little cheaper rate. If you're interested in going and staying at the hotel with the folks from the conference, let me know, and we're kind of organizing that. Otherwise, I think we're good.
Yeah, I have not yet been to General Conference, which is wild because we got elected in 2019, but what occurs to me in spaces and places like that, and maybe this can help to frame our praying as we continue to prepare. God has done incredible things in our church and through the people in our church, across our whole church. And it is stunning in the most beautiful way to see God doing new things, powerful things in individuals and in communities across the world. And sometimes when we go to General Conference, we get to see that. And that's wonderful. And sometimes we go and we see people being messy. And that's hard. What I'm trying to do personally is remember that even when we see messy people, that still is a story about God's goodness and grace. It's a different kind of story, but it's still a story about the work God is doing and continues to do. And so I am trying personally to focus on the beauty and on the incredible things that the people called Methodists have done and are continuing to do. And when I see the messy stuff, rather than just be disappointed, just be let down, just be irritated with it, I try to remember, wow, our God is so patient with us, even me, right? And that is what is drawing me to Charlotte in this moment. That's what's pulling my heart forward. And so hope you can meet us in that space of being hopeful.
So thank you for coming. Liza, any chance you were wanting to pray for us? That's fantastic. We are connected. And we can pray for you.
Yes, thanks. So we're on the floor. Is that okay with the delegation if there are hands laid on you or in general? Are we all in? Gracious God, we pause in this moment of district work to pray for our delegation in the coming months. We've just heard some of the complexities with which they are dealing with and thinking about, and so we just want them to know that we are with them, that you are with them, and we're so grateful for the work of this group that represents many of us as individuals, as clergy, as churches, and as our denomination that we love dearly. So we just ask for clarity of mind, clarity of heart, and willingness to think broadly and outside of the box about what comes next for the future of our church. Thank you for their energy, their time, and the impact that it has on their families and their communities, and we're so grateful. We're grateful for the way that you are at work in our world. In your name we pray. Amen.